It started with faint clucking and odd cheers echoing through the quiet neighborhood at midnight. At first, the neighborhood watch brushed it off as an eccentric backyard gathering. But as the nights wore on, the noises grew louder, more distinct, and undeniably unusual. Clara, the group leader, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When Mark found a discarded bedding slip near the couple's fence, the watch realized they weren't just hearing noises. They were uncovering a secret that would ruffle more than just feathers. The morning after hearing the strange sounds again, Mark, a member of the neighborhood watch, was walking his dog along the usual route near Jack and Linda's house. As his Labrador, Max, sniffed near their fence, Mark noticed something unusual: a small pile of feathers scattered across the ground. Among them was a crumpled slip of paper. Curious, Mark picked it up and saw a bold title at the top: Grand Rooster Championship. $500 minimum bet. Mark stared at it, baffled. He hurriedly stuffed the slip into his pocket and rushed to Clara's house, calling an emergency meeting of the watch. Within an hour, Clara, Rachel, Peter, and Mark were gathered in her living room, the betting slip lying on the coffee table between them. "A Grand Rooster Championship?" Rachel asked, her eyebrows raised. "What is this, some kind of chicken race?" Clara frowned, leaning forward. "More likely cockfighting. It's illegal and dangerous, and if that's what's happening in Jack and Linda's backyard, we need to know." Mark shrugged. They always seemed so normal. Quiet couple, keeps to themselves, waters their lawn every Saturday. But these late-night noises and now this betting slip? It's weird. Peter, ever the skeptic, leaned back in his chair. It could just be a prank. Maybe someone tossed it over the fence to mess with them. Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. Those noises we've been hearing, the cheering, the clucking, it all lines up. We need to keep a closer watch on them." That evening, the watch conducted their first stakeout. Clara and Peter parked a few houses down from Jack and Linda's property, while Rachel and Mark stationed themselves closer, hidden behind a hedge that bordered the backyard. As the sun set, the couple's house seemed quiet and ordinary. But as darkness fell, cars began arriving one by one. The vehicles were sleek, some with out-of-state plates, and their passengers carried cages into the backyard. "What's in those cages?" Rachel whispered, peering through the leaves. Mark adjusted his binoculars. "Chickens, I think, or roosters." From their position, they could hear faint clucking, followed by sporadic cheering. The noises grew louder as more people arrived, and soon it became clear this wasn't a small gathering. The couple's backyard seemed to transform into an arena. Clara's voice came through the walkie-talkie. "Are you seeing this?" Rachel replied softly, "Yeah, it's definitely not a barbecue." Peter chimed in. "Let's not jump to conclusions yet. It could be some weird hobby." Mark frowned. "A weird hobby that involves gambling slips? Come on." By the end of the night, the watch regrouped at Clara's house. The evidence was mounting, but Clara was hesitant to act. "We still don't have solid proof," she said. "If we call the police now, they could just deny everything." Rachel nodded. "We need to figure out exactly what's going on. Let's keep watching. Maybe get some photos or recordings." Mark held up the betting slip. "This might be all the proof we need." Clara shook her head. "It's a start, but it's not enough. If we're going to stop this, we need more. Let's meet tomorrow and plan our next move." As the group dispersed for the night, the weight of their discovery began to sink in. What had started as strange noises in the night was quickly becoming a full-blown investigation. And while the watch wasn't sure what they'd find, they knew one thing for certain. Jack and Linda's backyard held secrets that needed uncovering. The following evening, the neighborhood watch regrouped, each member buzzing with curiosity and unease about the couple's activities. Clara laid a map of the neighborhood on her dining table, marking Jack and Linda's property with a red circle. "Last night confirmed our suspicions," she began, "but we need more concrete evidence before we take this to the authorities. Tonight, we'll split into pairs again, but this time, we'll try to get closer." Mark leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "Closer? You mean trespassing?" Clara sighed. "Not trespassing, just observing from a better vantage point. Rachel and I will take the side alley. Mark and Peter, you'll cover the front. We're not taking any risks." As night fell, the group assumed their positions. Rachel and Clara crouched behind a line of shrubs near the alley bordering Jack and Linda's backyard. Mark and Peter stationed themselves across the street, blending into the shadows of a parked car. At first, the house appeared as mundane as ever. The porch light flickered on, and Jack stepped out to water his plants, his demeanor calm and unassuming. But as the clock struck 9, the activity began. Cars pulled up one by one, their drivers unloading cages covered with cloths. The sound of muffled clucking grew louder with each arrival. Guests, dressed casually but walking with purpose, slipped into the backyard through a side gate. From their position, Clara and Rachel could just make out the setup inside. Strings of lights hung between trees illuminated a makeshift arena bordered by hay bales. A small crowd gathered around the center, their cheers punctuated by bursts of squawking. "What in the world?" Rachel whispered, peering through her binoculars. "They've got an actual ring set up." Clara nodded, her jaw tightening. "This isn't just a backyard gathering. It's organized." From across the street, Peter's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie. "We've got movement near the garage. Someone's setting up a betting station." Mark adjusted his binoculars, focusing on the garage door, which was slightly ajar. Inside, he spotted Linda seated behind a folding table, stacks of cash and betting slips in front of her. A line of guests formed, each handing over wads of money. "Confirmed," Mark whispered into the walkie-talkie. "They're taking bets." The night wore on, and the activity inside the backyard grew more raucous. From their position, Clara and Rachel could hear snippets of conversation. "Thunderclaw's undefeated this season," one man bragged. "Yeah, but Razorbeak's got a killer left hook," another replied. Clara frowned. "They're talking about the Roosters like they're boxers." Rachel sighed. "That's because they are. This is a full-on fight club." The realization hit Clara like a punch. Jack and Linda weren't just hosting small-time chicken fights. They were running a well-oiled operation, complete with an arena, betting system, and loyal clientele. As the crowd began to disperse around midnight, the watch regrouped at Clara's house. Each member was visibly shaken, the weight of their discovery pressing heavily on their shoulders. "They've got an entire setup back there," Rachel said, recounting what she'd seen. "An arena, lights, everything, and Linda's running the bets from the garage." Mark nodded. "This isn't amateur hour. They know what they're doing." Peter frowned. "We've got enough to call the police, don't we?" Clara hesitated. "We have a lot, but it's still circumstantial. They could claim it's just a backyard show with no gambling involved." Rachel folded her arms. "So, what do we do? Wait until someone gets hurt?" Clara sighed, her mind racing. "We gather more evidence. If they're running something this big, there's no way last night was a one-time event. We'll monitor them again tomorrow and document everything." As the group dispersed for the night, Clara stared out her window, her mind clouded with worry. Jack and Linda had hidden their operation in plain sight, fooling the entire neighborhood for who knows how long, and now it was up to the watch to stop them, before things escalated any further. The next evening, Clara and the watch resumed their surveillance, determined to capture definitive evidence of Jack and Linda's operation. Armed with cameras, binoculars, and notebooks, the group split into their usual pairs, each ready for a long night. Clara and Rachel took up a position behind a tall hedge bordering the couple's backyard. From their vantage point, they had a clear view of the makeshift arena and the growing crowd. Tonight's turnout was larger than the night before, with nearly 24 cars parked along the street and more cages being unloaded. "This is even bigger than last time," Rachel whispered, adjusting her camera. "Look at those cages. Some of them are double the size." Clara nodded, her brow furrowed. It's growing. They're getting bolder. From across the street, Mark and Peter monitored the activity near the garage. Using binoculars, Mark spotted Linda behind her betting table, tallying numbers in a notebook while guests exchanged cash for slips. She's keeping detailed records, Mark said quietly. If we can get our hands on that notebook, it's game over for them. Peter focused his binoculars on the crowd, catching snippets of conversation as the guests mingled. They're talking about odds, he whispered. Sounds like tonight's fight is between a rooster named Razorbeak and someone called Thunderclaw. These names sound straight out of a boxing movie. Mark chuckled softly, though his tone quickly turned serious. This is no joke. These people are serious about this. Look at how much money they're throwing around. As the night progressed, the sounds of cheering and clucking grew louder. Clara and Rachel inched closer to the fence, hoping to capture clear photos of the event. Through a gap in the wood, Rachel managed to snap a series of pictures of the arena. The images showed two roosters, their feathers glossy under the string lights, circling each other while the crowd shouted and waved betting slips in the air. "This is insane," Rachel muttered. "They've got referees, a scoreboard, and everything." Clara motioned for her to stay quiet as the sound of raised voices caught their attention. Peering through the gap, they saw Jack arguing with a guest near the betting station. The man, dressed in a leather jacket, slammed his fist on the table. "You promised me Thunderclaw would win," the man shouted. "I've got too much riding on this to lose now." Jack's expression remained calm, but his tone was icy. "The fights are fair. If you don't like the outcome, that's your problem." The man muttered something under his breath before storming off, but not before Clara and Rachel caught a glimpse of a gun tucked into his waistband. Rachel gasped softly. "Did you see that?" Clara nodded, her heart pounding. "This isn't just about chickens anymore. There's real danger here." Back at Clara's house, the group reviewed the photos and notes they had gathered. The evidence was damning. Photos of the arena, video clips of the cheering crowd, and audio of the heated argument near the betting station. "This is more than enough for the police," Peter said. "They'll shut this down in no time." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. "It's strong evidence, but if we go to the police now, Jack and Linda could get tipped off and shut everything down before they're caught. We need to time this perfectly." Rachel frowned. "So, what do we do?" Clara glanced at the clock, her resolve hardening. "We need to watch one more night. If this is as organized as it seems, they're not just running fights, they're moving money. If we can catch them in the act, we'll have an airtight case." The group reluctantly agreed, though the tension in the room was palpable. As they prepared for another night of surveillance, Clara couldn't shake the image of the man with the gun. The stakes were rising, and the watch was no longer dealing with just an illegal chicken fight club. They were up against something far more dangerous. The next evening, the neighborhood watch regrouped, each member keenly aware of the growing danger surrounding Jack and Linda's operation. Clara laid out the plan on her dining table, her voice firm. "We need to get inside. The photos and audio we've captured are good, but if we can get footage from within, we'll have everything we need." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Inside? Are you suggesting one of us go undercover?" Clara nodded. "It's the only way. We've seen enough to piece together how guests are gaining entry. There's always a passphrase or some kind of reference to one of the roosters." Peter leaned back in his chair. "If we mess this up, they'll know someone's onto them." "I'll do it," Rachel said, surprising the group. "I've watched enough to know how they act. I'll keep my head down, place a fake bet, and leave before anyone notices me." Clara hesitated, but Rachel's determination was clear. "Okay, but you'll wear a wire and carry a hidden camera. We'll be close by the whole time." As the sun set, Rachel prepared for her undercover mission. Dressed inconspicuously, she approached Jack and Linda's backyard, using the passphrase the group had overheard earlier. "I'm here for Thunderclaw." The man at the gate nodded, letting her in without question. Rachel's first impression of the backyard confirmed everything they suspected. String lights illuminated the makeshift arena, where a crowd of about 30 people stood cheering. To her left, Linda manned the betting table, counting cash with practiced efficiency. To her right, Jack coordinated the fights, his voice booming as he introduced the Roosters. "Tonight's main event, Thunderclaw versus Razorbeak," Jack announced, eliciting loud cheers from the crowd. Rachel kept her head down, pretending to blend in as she made her way toward the betting table. She placed a small fake bet, ensuring her movements didn't draw attention. All the while, the hidden camera in her jacket recorded everything: the crowd, the betting slips, and the stacks of cash. Outside, Clara, Mark, and Peter listened nervously through Rachel's wire. "She's in," Clara whispered, gripping the receiver tightly. "Let's hope she gets what we need." Inside, Rachel positioned herself near the arena, capturing footage of the fight. The Roosters circled each other, their glossy feathers gleaming under the lights. The crowd roared as the birds lunged, their claws and beaks colliding in a flurry of feathers and dust. Rachel's focus shifted as she noticed two men near the edge of the crowd, speaking in hushed tones. One of them gestured toward a duffel bag on the ground. "The money's ready to move," he said. "We'll take it after this fight." Rachel's pulse quickened. This was the proof Clara had been waiting for, evidence that the operation wasn't just about gambling but also laundering money. She moved closer, angling her camera toward the men in the bag. As the fight ended and the crowd erupted in cheers, Rachel knew it was time to leave. She slipped away from the group, heading back toward the gate. But as she reached the exit, Jack's voice stopped her cold. "Hey, you, new girl," he called. Rachel froze, turning slowly. "Yes?" Jack studied her, his eyes narrowing. "Haven't seen you here before. Who invited you?" Rachel's mind raced. Mike. He said this was the best place for a good fight." Jack's expression softened slightly, but suspicion lingered in his gaze. "Next time, bring Mike with you. We don't like strangers." "Of course," Rachel said, forcing a smile. She walked quickly through the gate, her heart pounding as she made her way back to the watch's rendezvous point. When Rachel returned to Clara's house, the group erupted in relieved cheers. "You did it," Peter said, patting her on the back. Rachel slumped into a chair, pulling out the hidden camera. "I got footage of everything: the arena, the betting table, and even the money being moved." Clara reviewed the footage, her expression one of grim satisfaction. "This is it. We have everything we need. Tomorrow, we hand this over to the police." That night, as Rachel recounted her experience, the group couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and unease. They had taken a significant step toward shutting down the operation, but Rachel's close call with Jack served as a stark reminder of the risks they were taking. The watch had come too far to back down now, but they knew the stakes were higher than ever. The following morning, Clara and the group gathered to review the footage Rachel had captured the night before. The grainy video showed everything they needed: the makeshift arena, the roaring crowd, Linda tallying bets, and, most importantly, the two men discussing the transfer of money. Clara paused the video, her finger pointing to the duffel bag on the ground. "This is it," she said, her voice firm. "This proves they're not just hosting fights, they're laundering money. We need to take this to the police." Mark leaned back in his chair, skeptical as ever. "And what if we do? What's stopping Jack and Linda from shutting it all down before the cops arrive? They clearly have some shady connections." Peter frowned. "So what are you suggesting? That we do nothing? We've come this far. We can't just sit on this." Mark crossed his arms. "I'm not saying we do nothing. I'm saying we need to think this through. If they catch wind of the cops, they'll disappear, and we'll lose our chance to stop them." Clara sighed, rubbing her temples. "We've gathered enough evidence. The police can act quickly if we give them everything. We don't have to do this alone." Despite Clara's confidence, the group was divided. Rachel, still shaken from her close call with Jack, agreed with Mark. "He was suspicious of me last night," she said. "If they realize we're the ones watching them, who knows what they'll do?" Peter, however, sided with Clara. "If we wait too long, we're just giving them more time to cover their tracks. We have the evidence. Let's use it." The debate raged on, tension filling the room. Finally, Clara raised her hand, silencing the group. "Let's compromise," she said. "We'll contact Sergeant Harris and show him what we have. If he thinks we need more, we'll keep watching. But if he says we've got enough, we let the police handle it." The group reluctantly agreed, though unease lingered in the air. That afternoon, Clara met with Sergeant Harris at the police station, presenting the footage, photos, and notes the watch had compiled. Harris watched the video intently, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "This is solid," he said finally. "The footage alone is enough to justify a search warrant. The conversation about the money transfer, that's the nail in the coffin." Clara felt a wave of relief. "So, you'll act on this?" Harris nodded. "We'll start planning a sting operation immediately. This kind of setup doesn't just vanish overnight, but we need to move carefully to ensure we catch everyone involved." That evening, Clara relayed the update to the group. "Harris says they're planning a sting," she explained. "They'll move in during one of the fights, probably within the next few days." Mark still looked uneasy. "And what do we do until then? Just wait?" "Exactly," Clara said. "The police have it under control now. We've done our part." Peter nodded in agreement, but Rachel remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the floor. Finally, she spoke. "What if they suspect something before the sting happens? If they pack up and leave, all this work will be for nothing." Clara hesitated. "That's a risk we have to take. We can't interfere now. It's too dangerous." Over the next 2 days, the group stayed on high alert, watching for any signs that Jack and Linda were growing suspicious. To their relief, the couple seemed oblivious, continuing their operation as usual. Cars arrived each night, the backyard filled with cheering and clucking, and the duffel bags of money were quietly transported. But the tension within the watch remained. Each member knew the stakes were higher than ever, and the slightest misstep could ruin everything. As they waited for Harris's signal, they could only hope that their efforts would pay off, and that Jack and Linda's operation would finally come to an end. The sting operation loomed closer, and the neighborhood watch's nerves were fraying. Clara had instructed everyone to maintain a low profile, but the tension was palpable. Rachel, still rattled from her undercover mission, couldn't shake the feeling that Jack and Linda were growing suspicious. The group gathered at Clara's house to go over their observations from the past few days. "They're still running the fights like clockwork," Peter reported. "But I noticed something last night. 2 new guys hanging around the garage. They looked like hired muscle." Mark frowned. "Hired muscle? Great. That's exactly what we need. A couple of goons sniffing around while we're trying to stay invisible." Rachel shifted uneasily. "I saw them too. One of them caught me looking when I drove by. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he was watching me." Clara's expression grew serious. "We need to be careful. If they're getting suspicious, it might mean they're planning something." That evening, the watch decided to conduct one last round of surveillance before the police operation. Rachel and Peter took the first shift, stationed in Peter's car a few houses down from Jack and Linda's property. The night began quietly, with the usual stream of cars and guests arriving, but around midnight, things took a turn. "I think someone's coming this way," Rachel whispered, peering through binoculars. A man in a leather jacket was walking toward their car, his gaze locked on their position. "Act normal," Peter muttered, his voice tight. He adjusted the rear-view mirror, pretending to check his reflection. The man stopped a few feet from the car, squinting at them. "You lost or something?" he called out. Peter forced a smile, rolling down the window slightly. "Just waiting for a friend." The man's eyes narrowed. "This isn't the place to wait. Keep moving." Rachel nodded quickly, her heart pounding. "Of course. Sorry about that." She tapped Peter's arm and he pulled the car away from the curb. As soon as they were out of sight, Rachel exhaled shakily. That was too close. They're on to us. Peter nodded grimly. We need to tell Clara. They're watching for anyone snooping around. When the group reconvened, Rachel recounted the incident. Clara's face was a mix of concern and determination. This confirms it. They know something's up, but it's too late for them to cover their tracks. Harris is moving in soon. Mark crossed his arms. Soon isn't good enough. What if they bolt tonight? What if they realize we've been watching them this whole time? Clara shook her head. We can't interfere now. The police have everything they need to make the arrests. If we push too hard, we'll only make things worse. The watch's fears came to a head the following night. As Rachel and Clara conducted a final stakeout, they noticed a flurry of unusual activity in the backyard. Jack and Linda were hurriedly packing equipment into the garage while the two new men loaded cages into a van. They're getting ready to leave, Rachel whispered, snapping photos with her camera. They must have figured out the police are onto them. Clara grabbed her phone and called Sergeant Harris. They're moving equipment and cages into a van, she reported. It looks like they're preparing to bolt. Harris's voice was calm but firm. We've been monitoring them too. Don't worry, they won't get far. Just stay back and let us handle it. That night, the watch gathered at Clara's house, anxiously awaiting updates from Harris. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, just after midnight, Clara's phone buzzed. It's done, Harris said. We intercepted the van before it could leave the neighborhood. Jack and Linda are in custody, along with their associates. The operation is officially shut down. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, Sergeant. I'll let the others know. As she hung up, the group erupted into cheers. The tension of the past weeks melted away, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and relief. They had faced danger, taken risks, and ultimately helped bring down an illegal operation in their own backyard. But even as the excitement subsided, the group couldn't ignore the close calls they had faced. The watch had come dangerously close to being discovered, and they knew the situation could have ended very differently. As Clara looked around the room, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had made their neighborhood safer, but the experience had also taught them the importance of vigilance and the power of standing together. With Jack and Linda in custody and the illegal operation dismantled, the neighborhood watch thought their part in the story was over. But the next morning, Clara received an unexpected call from Sergeant Harris. We've uncovered evidence of a larger network, Harris explained. The operation in your neighborhood wasn't just a one-off, it was part of a regional circuit of illegal animal fights. We believe they were preparing for a high-stakes match involving significant money laundering. Clara's heart sank. You're saying this isn't over? Not yet, Harris admitted, but the information you provided has given us a chance to disrupt the entire network. We're planning a larger sting operation to take down the main players. Later that day, Clara gathered the group to relay the update. Harris says Jack and Linda's backyard was just the tip of the iceberg, she explained. They've connected it to a larger circuit of illegal fights. There's going to be a major sting operation soon. Mark groaned. So, what? You're saying this thing could have been even bigger? Great, just when I thought we could breathe. Rachel, however, was intrigued. If they're going after the main players, that means we helped with something way bigger than just our neighborhood. That's huge. Peter nodded. It also means we need to stay on high alert. If there's more to this network, they could try to retaliate. As the days passed, the watch kept a low profile, avoiding any further involvement in the case. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't quite over. Her instincts were proven correct when Rachel noticed unfamiliar cars parked near the playground one evening. These aren't locals, Rachel said, snapping a photo of the license plates. They're scouting the area. Peter frowned. They could be part of the larger network trying to figure out what happened. Clara immediately called Harris, reporting the suspicious activity. We're monitoring them, Harris assured her. Your neighborhood is under watch, but it's crucial that you and your group stay out of sight. We don't want to tip them off." Despite the police's reassurances, tension gripped the neighborhood. The watch members found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, their once peaceful community feeling like a battlefield. Clara, determined to keep spirits high, called a meeting to address their fears. "We've already done so much to protect this neighborhood," she said. "What we're feeling now is temporary. Once the police take down the rest of this network, we'll get our peace back." Rachel sighed. "I hope you're right. I just want to go back to feeling safe." The tipping point came a few nights later when Rachel spotted a familiar figure near Jack and Linda's now vacant house. It was one of the men from the betting station, his silhouette unmistakable under the dim streetlights. Rachel immediately alerted the watch, who gathered at Clara's house to decide their next move. "We need to let Harris know," Peter said firmly. "If they're still sniffing around, it means they're trying to figure out what we know." Clara agreed and called Harris, who responded quickly. Within an hour, unmarked police cars were stationed around the neighborhood, monitoring the situation. The man was picked up for questioning, and the watch learned later that his arrest had provided key intel for the upcoming sting operation. That evening, the watch gathered for what Clara hoped would be their final meeting on the matter. "This has been one of the most challenging experiences we've faced as a group," she said, "but we've made a real difference, not just for our neighborhood, but for the larger community. Let's trust that the police will finish the job." The group nodded, their confidence bolstered by Clara's words. They had faced danger, uncovered a secret world of crime, and stood together in the face of adversity. Now, all they could do was wait and hope for a safe and lasting resolution. The days following the man's arrest were nerve-wracking for the neighborhood watch. While the police assured them that their neighborhood was under surveillance, the watch couldn't shake the feeling that the network's remaining players were closing in. Clara encouraged everyone to stick to their routines, but even she felt the weight of their circumstances. One evening, Rachel noticed something troubling. A black SUV with tinted windows had parked at the end of her street, its engine idling. She called Clara immediately. "It's the same SUV I saw before," Rachel whispered. "They're watching us." Clara's stomach churned. "Stay inside and lock your doors. I'll alert Harris." Sergeant Harris dispatched a patrol car to investigate, but by the time it arrived, the SUV was gone. Harris assured Clara that the situation was under control, but she could sense his frustration. "We're closing in on the main operation," he said. "They know we're onto them, which is why they're trying to intimidate anyone who might be a threat." "They're targeting us because of what we've uncovered," Clara replied. "How much longer until the sting happens?" "We're finalizing the details," Harris said. "It won't be long now." The watch convened that evening to discuss the growing tension. Mark, who had been skeptical from the start, voiced his concerns. "This is getting too dangerous," he said. "First the guy at the betting table, now the SUV. They know we're involved." Rachel, still shaken from her earlier encounter, nodded. "He's right. What if they decide to do more than just watch?" Peter leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "We've come too far to back out now. If we let fear stop us, they win. The police are watching the neighborhood. We just need to hold on a little longer." Clara stood, her tone resolute. "Peter's right. This isn't just about us anymore. We've exposed something much bigger than a backyard operation. If we stay united, we can see this through." That night, Clara stayed up late, watching the street from her window. Every sound, every passing car set her on edge. Around midnight, she noticed headlights approaching. Her breath caught as the same black SUV rolled slowly down the street. It paused briefly in front of her house before driving away. Clara immediately called Harris, who promised to increase patrols in the area. But as she hung up, she realized how deeply the syndicate's intimidation tactics had unsettled her. For the first time, she doubted whether they had made the right decision in getting involved. The following morning brought a glimmer of hope. Harris called with an update. The sting operation was scheduled for that evening. "We've located the main hub of the network," he said. "It's a warehouse downtown. We'll be moving in tonight to take them down." Clara relayed the news to the group, and while it provided some relief, the day passed in a haze of anxiety. They knew the sting was risky, and there was no guarantee it would succeed. That evening, as the sting operation unfolded, the watch gathered at Clara's house, waiting for updates. The minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Finally, Clara's phone buzzed. It was Harris. "We got them," he said, his voice filled with triumph. "The entire operation is dismantled. We arrested over a dozen suspects, seized cash and records, and confirmed the connection to Jack and Linda's backyard fights. This is a huge win." Clara exhaled deeply, her tension melting away. "Thank you, Sergeant. This means everything to us." The watch erupted into cheers when Clara shared the news. For the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of closure. The syndicate's network had been destroyed, and their neighborhood was finally safe. But even as the relief washed over them, Clara knew the experience had left its mark. The watch had been tested in ways they never anticipated, and while they had emerged victorious, they would carry the memories and the lessons of their ordeal for years to come. The morning after the sting operation, Clara awoke to a sense of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. The lingering threat was gone, and the neighborhood was finally safe again. Still, the events of the previous night replayed in her mind as she prepared to meet with Sergeant Harris to learn the full details of the operation. At the police station, Harris greeted Clara and the rest of the watch warmly. "You've done something extraordinary," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "Because of your efforts, we've dismantled one of the largest regional networks of illegal animal fights and money laundering operations." Rachel raised her hand, still slightly nervous despite the good news. "What about Jack and Linda? What's going to happen to them?" Harris's expression turned serious. "They're cooperating. They've provided valuable information about the larger network, which helped us secure additional arrests. They'll face charges, but their willingness to help will work in their favor." Mark leaned forward, his arms crossed. "And the big players? Are they all behind bars?" Harris nodded. The sting resulted in 14 arrests, including several high-ranking members of the syndicate. We seized large amounts of cash, records, and evidence tying them to operations across multiple towns. It's a massive blow to their network. That evening, Clara invited the group to her house to celebrate. The mood was lighter than it had been in weeks, and the group shared stories and laughter, finally able to relax. "We really did it," Peter said, raising his coffee mug in a toast. "From spotting feathers in a yard to taking down a crime syndicate." Rachel chuckled. Who knew a chicken fight club would lead to all this? Mark smirked. "I still can't believe Jack and Linda were running the whole thing. They always seemed so normal." Clara's smile faded slightly. "It's a reminder that you never really know what's happening behind closed doors. But it's also a testament to what we can do when we work together." The celebration was short-lived as Clara knew there were still loose ends to address. The aftermath of the operation left the neighborhood shaken, and some residents remained on edge. Clara proposed a plan to strengthen the watch, turning their ad hoc group into a more formal organization. "We've proven we can make a difference," she said, addressing the group. "But we need to ensure we're prepared for anything that comes our way. Let's use what we've learned to create a stronger, safer community." The group agreed enthusiastically, each member eager to contribute. Rachel suggested workshops on recognizing suspicious activity, while Peter proposed regular patrol schedules. Mark, though still skeptical, offered to handle communications with local authorities. As the days passed, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The watch's efforts became a source of inspiration, and more residents expressed interest in joining their patrols. Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing they had turned a moment of crisis into an opportunity for growth. One evening, Clara stood on her porch, watching the sun set over the quiet street. The sounds of children playing in the distance filled the air. a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few weeks. She thought back to the moment they had first suspected Jack and Linda, marveling at how far they had come. "We did something good," she said quietly to herself, "and we'll be ready if anything like this ever happens again." With the syndicate dismantled and Jack and Linda's backyard operation shut down, the neighborhood began to breathe easier. The watch's success had brought a renewed sense of safety to the community, but it also left behind a few scars, both physical and emotional. Clara decided to hold one final meeting to reflect on their journey and discuss the future of the watch. That evening, the group gathered at her house, their mood lighter but still tinged with the weight of everything they had been through. "We've come a long way," Clara began, standing at the head of the table. "What started as a few odd noises and a betting slip turned into something none of us could have imagined. We uncovered a major operation, and because of our efforts, the police were able to bring it down." Rachel smiled. "I still can't believe we managed to pull it off. I mean, we're just a bunch of neighbors." Peter nodded. A bunch of neighbors who stepped up when it mattered most. That's something to be proud of. Mark, ever the pragmatist, leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, but let's not forget how close we came to being in real trouble. Those guys weren't playing around." Clara raised a hand. "You're right, Mark, and that's why we need to take what we've learned and use it to make our neighborhood even stronger. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Over the next few days, Clara and the group worked on formalizing the neighborhood watch. They established a schedule for patrols, created a system for reporting suspicious activity, and even set up a community hotline for residents to share concerns. Clara reached out to Sergeant Harris, who agreed to host a workshop on safety and awareness for the neighborhood. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves began attending meetings, eager to contribute. The shared experience of uncovering the Fight Club had brought people closer together, fostering a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Meanwhile, the remnants of Jack and Linda's operation were cleaned up. Their backyard, once a hub of illegal activity, was now quiet and empty. The sight of the dismantled arena served as a stark reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control, even in a seemingly peaceful neighborhood. Clara visited the site one afternoon, standing by the fence where it had all begun. She thought about Jack and Linda, how their desperation had led them down such a dark path. While their actions were inexcusable, Clara couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for them. They were a cautionary tale of what could happen when people felt trapped and powerless. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood continued to heal. The watch's newfound structure and purpose brought a sense of stability, and residents grew more connected than ever before. Clara often reflected on how much they had achieved, knowing their efforts had not only protected their community, but also set an example for others. One evening, as Clara sat on her porch, Peter joined her with 2 mugs of coffee. "Think we'll ever have to deal with something like that again?" he asked, handing her a mug. Clara chuckled softly. "I hope not, but if we do, we'll be ready." Peter raised his mug in a toast. "To the neighborhood watch, keeping our coop safe." Clara smiled, clinking her mug against his. "To the watch." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. They had faced danger, uncovered hidden truths, and come out stronger on the other side. The future felt brighter, not just for the watch, but for the entire neighborhood.